If you're a FedEx pilot, the biggest retirement decision of your career may come down to one question: which option actually leaves you with the most money after taxes? If you watched our last episode, Ryan Fleming, the pilot's advisor, broke down 3 retirement paths in the 2026 tentative agreement, from a pension-style income stream to a hybrid approach to a more flexible contribution-based option. But here's the reality. The numbers that you see on paper aren't the numbers you necessarily keep, because we have, of course, have taxes, timing, withdrawal strategies, and long-term planning that can dramatically change the outcome of any of those options. So today we're going to extend that conversation. We had so much feedback from that first episode with lots of additional questions from folks. So we're going to take that next step today and bring in Zach Smith of Pilot Tax, who you certainly know on the show well if you're a longtime viewer or listener. He's going to help us break down how each of these 3 options could play out from a tax perspective, including impacts on taxable income, Roth opportunities, those required minimum distributions or RMDs, and what all of this means for your family in the long term. Because the best option isn't just what looks good today, but about what works best over the next couple of decades. We're going to talk about all of that on today's episode. So let me grab Ryan and Zach and get started.
Well, we're extremely blessed today. Not only, of course, we always have Walter coordinating our shows and doing the intro, but Zach Smith from Pilot Tax has been nice enough to lend some of his time so that we could talk about the FedEx options with the possible new TA and really look at it from a tax perspective. I can't legally give tax advice. I'm not a CPA. I have my opinions, but now we have a CPA that works with pilots. His company's been working with pilots for over 30 years. And we're going to get his take on all these things. So, Zach, thank you very much for being here. Very much appreciate it. I think it's very, very valuable to not only talk about these options in general and what's best for these pilots' families, but really with a tax perspective on it, because it matters. It really matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on here. And it's been a contract that's been long awaited for a long time. We've been sitting for a while waiting for this. So we've got some interesting stuff with some of the retirement planning that Ryan and I want to take a look at here and kind of go through some of your options and what these look like both in the short term and long term. And I know you guys that work with us know that Ryan and I aren't just the short term looking type of folks. We're looking long term down the road, and that's really what we want to focus today on. Not just what the tax side is going to look like when you make your elections today, but what kind of impact this is going to have for us, as we approach retirement.
Well, of course, and you actually get to work with pilots through retirement in the distribution phase when it really matters. I mean, the whole reason why we do any of the things we do, why we save for retirement, is actually for retirement in that distribution phase. And I think, unfortunately, most of the time when we file taxes, we're just looking at this year versus what we like to talk about, which is strategic tax planning and making decisions today that are going to help us over the long term, whether that's retirement or legacy planning. And I always joke with pilots, pilots want all of the upside, none of the downside. They want instant gratification. And it's hard because these decisions that we're going to make on this TA for retirement have long-term consequences. And so we can't do what just feels good today. We really have to look at the long term and how that's going to affect these families.
That's true. And FedEx is very unique in this regard. You guys have a much, much different retirement setup than what we see at American, Delta, United, Southwest. This is so much different. Some of the new stuff that we're going to go through here today, though, does kind of have some synergies with some of the other plans that Ryan and I have been seeing at some of the other airlines. So we'll kind of jump in here and start running through the 3 options that you guys are going to have and talk about the benefits, the downsides, and kind of big picture what each one of these looks like. So we'll jump in. Your option 1 here is going to be essentially the legacy plan, where we'll essentially keep what we've had for years, right? The traditional pension based on years of service and so forth. They are raising the cap on that. I know Ryan went through some of this in a previous episode that he did. They are raising the cap. The amount of the pension is going up, and they will continue to have the defined contribution at 9%. This is the traditional stuff we've been dealing with FedEx pilots for years, right? And you guys are so much more complicated in retirement. Ryan and I talk about avoiding the retirement ticking tax time bomb. Well, you guys at FedEx start with that time bomb with the wick already half lit, because our base income is your pension And then we've got to contend with the 401k withdrawals on top of that, in addition to Social Security and everything else. So, that first option is going to give you your pension. We feel really good that this is a good option for folks that are close to retirement. If you're getting within, I'd say, 10 years or less of retirement, this option may make a lot of sense for you. And again, everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different, but maintaining that high pension, and we'll explain more as we go through some of these other options, but keeping that high pension as close as you are to retirement, or those that may be going before the age of 65, this certainly may be a good option. And then Brian, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, we try to put numbers to all this where it's a math equation, but there's a lot of tough questions, like the questions that are very individual in nature that dictate between one or the other. And the thing that I'd say about the traditional pension is that's guaranteed money in retirement. And so the math would be that you'd have to make up the difference of what you're giving up on that pension if you choose one of the other options. And it's not performance based. If you have your high five, you can min run and still get that pension. Whereas option 2 and option 3 are very much performance based. You have to fly and make a lot of money for that to really start working in your favor. And of course, if you have time to do that, it all works out. But it is very much performance based on option 2 and option 3.
And to add to that, Ryan has alluded to this previously, and I see it a lot in my practice. Unfortunately, pilots aren't our people living to 85 or 90. Historically, statistically based, the longevity, the life expectancy, and things like that of especially the cargo airlines, it's hard on your body. All right. So I think, Ryan had alluded to a study that had been done that the average payout period was somewhere between 5 and 7 years on these pensions. So some of the other options we're going to go through here may have some more benefit for legacy planning and long-term planning for kids, inheriting spouses, and things like that, where the pension essentially stops aside of spousal benefits upon your death. So, depending on your health and things like that, then some of these other options may certainly make more sense as well.
Yeah, and for FedEx pilots accepting this TA where they're giving up their pension, I can honestly say that when I'm doing a retirement income plan for FedEx pilots versus like Delta, American, where they need all of their income to come from their retirement earnings, in many cases, a FedEx pilot, because of their pension and Social Security, they're not dipping into their money that much. That money continues to grow, which is great, except when we have tax deferred money where it just creates a bigger and bigger tax problem later on. So those are some of the things to think about as well.
Absolutely. So, well, let's jump into option 2 here. This is really interesting that FedEx is going to be offering this. We've seen these plans, the market-based cash balance plan. We've already seen this rolled out with Delta. We've seen it rolled out with American, and United Airlines right now is in the process of getting theirs approved. We fully anticipate that one to go through based on precedents with the IRS. So they're doing something similar here. So just a quick explanation of what a market-based cash balance plan is. Every year, contributions to a 401k plan, company-sponsored plan, are limited in total. Okay, you have an amount that you can put in based on your age, and you have an amount the company can put in with a max for the year between you and your employer. So as these contracts that the airlines have rolled out, there's been this big question of what do we do with any excess money? What do we do once we've hit the max between the employer and the employee? Our contract says it has to be paid, right? They still owe us, in this case, that 9%. So these market-based cash balance plans, starting with Delta, started to get popular for the airlines for a number of different corporate reasons that we don't have to get into today. Option 2 is essentially a soft freeze on your pension with a continued 9% contribution into your 401k, 9% of what you're earning. But anything that then spills over will go into what is a market-based cash balance plan. These are highly restrictive plans. They are more pre-tax money, and you have no control over it. All right. A lot of the pilots like these plans because it is pre-tax money, meaning that 9% that they're giving you that's spilling into the plan, we're not paying tax on it today. Okay. That's the popular side. The reason that Ryan and I are not a fan of these plans is for the exact reason that some people like them, right? Pre-tax money, right? Once that money goes in there, it's contributing more to our retirement ticking tax time bomb of pre-tax money that we've got to contend with in retirement. All right. Which, can create all sorts of issues later on with Medicare, leaving money to kids and so forth. Number two, you have no control over how this money is invested. Zero control. It gets placed in there. It's handled by a fiduciary. It will grow at the rate that is set by the fiduciaries and the investment returns. And these are typically very conservatively invested. We tend to like taking an approach where we have pay tax today, save money over the long run. And we'll get into that here with option three. But option two is that cash balance plan. You'll still get the pension frozen wherever it is today, and you'll still get the 9%, but you've got to be very careful about your contributions on that.
And what I want to bring up with this, I wanted Zach to be the star of today's show and really talk and discuss everything from a tax perspective. But what FedEx is doing here is actually a lot different from the other airlines. A lot of the other airlines are having spillover into a market-based cash balance plan. Option two here is you're actually having that 9 or 10% directly contributed to the market-based cash balance plan, and then the extra 9%, like a defined contribution to fill up those buckets. So it's very, very different from like the other airlines where there's the option for the spillover to go into this market-based cash balance plan. This is a direct contribution of that percentage right away into a market-based cash balance plan. So if you look at your 19%, we're going to call it 9 and 10% of that as the contract changes is going directly into this plan that you have no control over. If you're 30 or 40 years old, it's very conservatively invested, which in my opinion is not really suitable for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you're locking up half essentially of the company contribution of the 18 and then respectively 19%. Half of that's getting locked up immediately in these cash balance plans. And Ryan's correct. If you're mid 30s or even mid 40s or younger, this is a long time for money to be locked up and conservatively invested from my perspective of things.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I get it where this is actually quite beneficial to the company where they're actually keeping control of all this money where you don't have control of it. And I get where from a tax perspective, you're deferring on half of that for a long, long time. So there's that benefit, but it's the long-term consequence of that and what it grows to that scares me.
It does me as well. And historically, these cash balance plans, if you actually read through the agreements, the only thing these cash balance plans many times guarantee is that you'll get back what you put in. They call them credits. There's no guarantee on return on investment or anything like that. They're just essentially assuring that you're going to get back what you put in, which generally, from Ryan and I's perspective, tells you how conservative this is invested.
It kind of reminds me of, and Zach, I don't know your perspective on this, but you know how some companies have these deferred compensation?
Yep.
I mean, that's what it really seems like to me is you're just deferring that compensation until down the line.
That's exactly what it is here. That's exactly what it is because it's not, like deferred compensation. You choose to defer that to a later date and not pay tax today. And there is a caveat to that. There's sometimes that these make sense, but it's a very individual basis that we need to look on these. There's some situations where deferred comp makes sense. A few situations I have where the cash balance plan might make sense based on age and what assets, our clients have. So anything else to add to that, Ryan? And we'll jump into the third option.
Not really. I just want to, throw it out there as well. Like I love having you on the show because you have a unique perspective to see pilots in retirement, how this actually plays out, what it looks like, them actually paying RMDs down the line. And you've also seen a lot of FedEx pilots that actually have the $130,000 a year pension and how that plays out. So, without tainting the well at all, I just love having your perspective on how you see these different plans and what would make the most sense. So I appreciate you going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about option three. I'm going to be completely honest with everybody. From my perspective, this is the option that I really like. Again, especially for those that are maybe 45 and under, this provides some opportunity. Okay. And especially because, as Ryan had alluded to earlier, many times our FedEx pilots or pilots that have a pension from somewhere, many times in retirement, the pension is sustaining their lifestyle. So we don't necessarily want those required minimum distributions at 72, nor do we need them, right? But these are things that are forced upon us, the retirement ticking tax time bomb with pre-tax money. So we believe that option three is potentially going to give us some more options over the long run. So let's talk about that one.
Hey, just a quick timeout from today's episode before we can continue with the conversation between Ryan and Zach. I want to let you know that Ryan has built a free educational modeler specifically for FedEx pilots to compare these three TA26 retirement options. It's called the FedEx TA26 retirement option tool. It's linked in the description of today's show. It's based off of 13 questions that are going to walk through your personal situation, basic things like your age, years of service, maybe military benefits, family risk tolerance, and some of your long-term goals. It only takes about 3 minutes to complete, and it's going to give you at least a first step and a clearer picture of how each of these options might stack up for your specific circumstances. So you've heard some of the general advice here on the show. Get more specific by taking a look at that model or putting in some of your info and seeing what some of the big decisions that you need to make are going forward with this little educational tool. So check it out today. Again, the link is in the description of today's show. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting app, should be able to find it easily, and you'll be all set. All right, let's get you back to Ryan and Zach.
So option 3 is essentially a combination of the first two, okay, with an opt-out, essentially. The way that this one works is they will freeze the pension. They will freeze your pension today or when the election is made, and then you will get the 18%, then stepped up to 19% NEC, right, non-elective contribution. That 18 and 19% will be paid to you into your 401k. Now, here's the neat part. You can opt out essentially the cash balance plan through this option, and then any spillover, once you hit the max contribution between you and the company, any spillover will come back to you as cash. Now, a couple points on this, all right? Coming back to you as cash and spillover, this will be treated as compensation to you. It will be taxed today. Now, as you and I, Ryan, have talked before, I know a lot of you have heard us say this, we like being taxed today to save money over the long run. My two favorite vehicles from a tax perspective for our pilots, and I know Ryan's going to laugh at this, my two favorite vehicles, hands down, are the Roth accounts and the taxable brokerage accounts. These give us the most flexibility for tax planning to leave money to kids, beneficiaries, and planning for tax structure and retirement. These absolutely give us the most flexibility. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to have some money in traditional. We're going to have some money in traditional, but go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I was just going to say there's 2 points I want to bring up here that I think are very important. Option 3, because it's cash over cap, because it's going to be after-tax money coming to the pilot, it's essential that you actually still save this money versus spend it. If you're going to choose option 3, you have to be disciplined and actually force the discipline to save this money. So I want to say that, in option 2, the best part about that is it's forcing you to actually invest and save that money. So for option 3, you have to have the discipline to do the right thing with those big compensations. And then also, Zach, I want you, because I think you've really changed my perspective. I want to take a step back here and really talk about that, because I never really viewed a taxable investment account as powerful as I do now. And what I mean by that is you're investing after-tax money, so you've already paid tax on the principal that goes in there. If you want to access it, it's completely liquid. And if you want to access it, you're only looking at capital gains tax, which is a much, much smaller percentage than tax-deferred money where it's straight income. But when we talk about how that grows over the long term and then a step up in cost basis, if you decide to, if you pass and get a step up in cost basis, can you just talk about how powerful these truly are from a legacy planning perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I want to talk about the tax piece and the legacy. These definitely are intertwined with each other, given the current tax climate we have right now. So I like the brokerage accounts second to the Roths. Roths accounts pass tax-free to beneficiaries. They're also tax-free withdrawals in retirement. The brokerage accounts, once we've maxed the Roth, the brokerage accounts to me are the second best option. And Ryan hit the nail on the head. The reason I like it from the tax perspective is, number one, you can very well control the income from the brokerage accounts. If you're working with a great advisor, they're going to communicate with you. You know what your gains and losses and things like that are going to be, right? You know when you're going to sell stock. You can choose when you sell. We can choose when we don't sell. We can sell some things at losses to offset gains, some tax loss harvesting. You have a lot of control on an annual basis of the tax impact of these accounts, and you can plan for it. That gives us the ability to plan for it. And these can grow and grow and grow. And yes, we're going to pay tax on earnings during the year in these accounts to maintain that after-tax status. But the huge piece here is these are also a fantastic wealth transition tool as well. You get what's called, when you pass away and your beneficiaries inherit assets, appreciated assets, you get what's called a stepped-up basis. This means that basically all the gains that you had during your lifetime are zeroed out at your death. and let's say you leave it to your kids. All right. If you buy a share of stock for $100 and it's worth $1,000 the day you die, the IRS is going to treat that asset as if your kids paid $1,000 for that. So these, assuming you're under the $14 million IRS gift and estate tax limitation, these brokerage accounts effectively can pass tax free to your kids. They can sell an entire portfolio the day after you die, and they pay very little, if any, tax at all because of that stepped up basis.
Zach, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but what's changed with us with, mutual funds pay out a little bit of capital gains each year. But if you invest in ETFs, they act like a stock where that's not happening at all. So it's changed the game. But can you talk about how that actually works? The difference between an individual account and a joint account for passing on to a spouse versus also both spouses being passed away and where it goes to the kids, and just how that looks with the step up in basis.
So generally a spouse can get stepped up basis in an asset from a spouse. We've seen this with houses. Maybe a husband owned a house before they got married. Wife has her own house, and then for whatever reason, one of them passes away and leaves it to the other. Those individually owned assets will generally get that same stepped up basis. So you're going to see that with the brokerage accounts as well. An individual account is going to get that step up to a spouse, just like a beneficiary, any other beneficiary will.
So does it make more sense to have an individual account versus a joint account because of that from a tax planning perspective?
You got me on the spot. So I want to say I'm not certain because, when we're looking at a joint account, it's a jointly owned asset. I'll have to get back with you on that, Ryan. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to give the wrong answer here, but, it's something we could look at and say, do we partially qualify, or do we qualify for a partial stepped up basis of these assets, right?
Well, I think that's what happens is in a joint account, it's a partial stepped up basis versus if you had an individual account that is solely yours and your spouse is the primary beneficiary, it actually is a much better way to set things up from a tax perspective.
Yeah, it certainly can be. And what we generally find too is, a lot of these large balances in accounts, a lot of times these are the ones that many times will get designated to be left to the kids, right? They'll spend down maybe some of the pre-tax 401k watching the tax brackets, because these pre-tax 401ks and IRAs are a horrible investment problem, or a horrible inheritance problem for beneficiaries. Ryan's alluded, we got the 10-year rule. So if you've got a parent that passes away that has $1 million in an IRA, the kids have to have that money out within 10 years. You can create massive tax problems. So many times these Roth accounts and these brokerage accounts are what we utilize for some of the wealth transition.
I was actually having a conversation with a FedEx pilot, and his dad was a retired FedEx pilot. And he was talking about how his dad kept talking about, hey, he lives off the pension. His 401k continues to grow. And of course, that's going to get passed on to the children later on. And I was actually breaking it down for him of how the tax consequence of that inherited IRA, what that would look like and how much he was going to end up having to give back to the government. And it was wild to watch his reaction to that. I was like, oh my God. And, and you get to see it. I mean, we get to see this where this happens. And yeah, you're getting an inheritance and it's going to be passed on, but it's actually a massive tax bill that really gets passed on.
Well, and this is especially a problem for my pilots, our clients, because, the pilots, you guys have high income, right? That's part of this. You guys are high in the brackets already. So I've had, many, many clients over the years where they inherit $1 million or $2 million 401k or IRA from a parent, and they're 50 years old. They're in the high earning years of their career. They're already getting into the 32% bracket. And then we now have a $2 million problem that we've got to have distributed over 10 years during a period of time where they don't need the money. Their income isn't going down. And now we've got to eat the tax bill, and we're, putting a lot of money on the tax return. And unfortunately, when we get to that point, there's nothing we can do. We are stuck. We are stuck once that account is inherited. So
sounds a lot like RMDs.
It is. It's accelerated RMDs.
But that's the huge point about it is no different than RMDs or an inherited IRA. You don't have a choice. There's no flexibility there. It just is. And the IRS, Uncle Sam wants to get paid. And then you don't, because of that lack of flexibility, you're just cutting the check. And I apologize. I feel like I got us off track here with these different options. But I think that when you really start looking at option 3, which I think is a very, very desirable option, especially for younger pilots or those what we call where I'm at, we call it the messy middle, where you're in mid 40s, late 40s, have a lot of time at the company. But I think option 3, as beautiful as it is, it's going to take a lot of discipline to make sure you're doing the right thing with that 19% contribution.
Yeah. And I want to bring option 3 into summary. So the pension will be frozen. You'll get an 18% NEC. So Ryan and I's general strategy for those that can budget well, we generally suggest front loading that plan at the beginning of the year, all to Roth, make your contributions to the Roth. We're essentially going to have a little race between you and the company to fund that 401k. Okay. So you're going to be heavy on your contributions at the beginning of the year. Once you and the company have maxed out that 401k contribution limit between your Roth contributions, the company contributions, and the mega backdoor Roth IRA or mega backdoor in plan, then that additional 19% that they still owe you of your pay, the rest of the year will come back to you as cash. Okay. We like these plans a lot. And then what we suggest, and we hit on this with the Roth and the brokerage accounts, as Ryan said, you got to be disciplined with this. Once you get that big jump in pay because that 18% is coming back to you, from a tax side of things, I suggest you, if you're not doing it already, you use that money to do a backdoor Roth IRA for you and your spouse. We can defer, anywhere between $14,000 to $16,000 depending on your age. Do the backdoor Roth IRA with that money if you're not already, and then anything in excess, we defer to a taxable brokerage account. What this does is it puts you in a position where we mitigate those required minimum distributions in retirement. We set you up for long-term planning to leave money to your kids, and we maintain control of the money. So that is my perspective on option 3, and that's why we like this one.
And ultimate flexibility as well. If life happens, you have access to this money now.
Right. And the other side of this too, if you retire at 65, you live another 5 years, your spouse may get half your pension. It may disappear if you're not married. All right. So that pension just stops. With a 401k, a Roth IRA, the taxable brokerage account, you still have that money to leave to your beneficiaries. It doesn't just disappear. That can go to somebody and you can leave a legacy in that manner.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see because we work with all the other airlines and see how, Delta and American and all the legacy airlines lost their pension. And then it became this, where we're at now, 18 or 19% of whatever you make that is being contributed. The cash balance, market-based cash balance plans that have started to appear here, and just see how the different airlines have different options. So we've seen a lot of these options before. It's just now FedEx is actually coming to the table as we're negotiating away our legacy pension to see this as an option. But we've watched this play out at the other airlines and with other clients. So it's choice is good, but it is a very big decision.
It is. And again, I want to emphasize this is going to be very individually specific. I think, by and large, I like option 3 a lot, but there's going to be several clients that I have that option 1 is going to make the most sense right now. It's everybody's situation's different. Everybody's your savings for retirement is different. Their family situation's different. So I just wanted to make sure to put that caveat on there.
Yeah. And just keep in mind too, like option 1, it doesn't happen a lot, but if you take option 1 and you are using less of your money because of the pension, that guaranteed income, depending on your cash flow needs, when there's a longevity question, you can choose a 50% survivor benefit. You can choose 100% survivor benefit if you want to still have that long-term payout. It's just at a much decreased rate from what you'd actually earn. So that is an option depending on your situation. But much like Zach says, option 3 looks very, very desirable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And feel free to reach out if you're working with us. Both of us are happy to answer questions. I know that we've got some time on this stuff. You guys are, contract's going to go to vote, and some of this stuff isn't going to take effect until next year. So we've got some time to look at this. We've got some time to evaluate it, and we'll see what the final plan looks like. Many of these cash balance plans do take private letter ruling approval from the IRS. As we mentioned, United Airlines is waiting on it. I don't know what the waiting period for FedEx or where they're at in that process will look like. But this isn't a decision we have to make tomorrow, but we certainly wanted to get some information out to everybody so that everybody kind of understands what we're looking at, because this stuff is complicated. When you're not looking at it every day, it is complicated. So we were, just wanted to kind of give a good explanation of what we got going on here.
Yeah, and I do want to say that we're trying to get as much information out to our listeners and our clients as possible. But we have a year, first of all, the TA hasn't even passed. It hasn't even come to a vote yet. But assuming it does pass, we have a year and a half before we have to make a decision. We don't have to make a decision on which one of these options till the end of 2027. So there's no reason to panic. There's no reason to we have to talk right now. But we want to get as much information out there so you can truly digest all of this and decide and see and learn so you know what's the best option for you and your family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ryan, I appreciate you having me today.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Is there anything else you want to add from a tax perspective on these three options? I appreciate you taking the time to discuss this with our listeners. Is there anything you want to close with?
I think the big picture here is the same thing you and I harp on all the time. Post-tax money, tax-free growth, and leaving money to kids for free. I mean, that's our strategy.
Absolutely. Well, Zach, I appreciate your time. Appreciate you being here. Of course, we have our amazing host, Walter Storholt here, who's going to wrap this all up and put a nice bow on it. But thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, you know how to reach me. We'll actually have all of Zach Smith and Pilot Tax contact information in the show notes as well. Thanks a lot. Everyone fly safe.
That wraps up today's conversation with Ryan Fleming and Zach Smith. Thanks to both of them for their guidance. As you've heard, the FedEx TA26 retirement decision, not just about choosing the highest number, it's about understanding how all these things work together. Taxes, income, flexibility, legacy planning, all of that's going to influence what's best for your personal situation. Just a quick reminder before we're gone for the day, the FedEx TA26 retirement option tool that Ryan's created. There's a link in the description to go take that test, go take that tool and the little quiz. That's going to help you get some initial analysis of what might be best as an option for your situation. It's 13 questions. It's about 3 minutes long to complete, and it'll give you some early answers here as you evaluate your choices. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to click that link in the description of today's show and reach out if you have any questions. We'll continue to be talking about this in the coming months. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Pilot's Advisor.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.